After 5 years of divorce, she opened the door and he kissed her hard, taking her straight to the bed. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Today is a magnificent day to embrace all of you, my cherished family members. I pray that your hearts are overflowing with heavenly blessings and that divine light radiates through your very being wherever you are in this glorious world. First, let us begin with a beautiful prayer. Most gracious and loving heavenly God, our divine Father, we bow before your magnificent throne with hearts bursting with gratitude for the precious gift of this storytelling family. We thank you for your infinite love that binds us together across oceans and continents. We are in awe of the celestial strength and divine wisdom you've bestowed upon extraordinary women like Maya Angelou, whose words are healing balm to America's soul. Wangari Maathai, whose sacred hands brought Kenya's forests back to life. Winnie Mandela, whose unbreakable spirit illuminated South Africa's darkest hours. Michelle Jean, whose angelic leadership blessed Canada with grace. Dame Eugenia Charles, whose heaven-sent courage transformed Dominica. Portia Simpson Miller, whose God-given voice awakened Jamaica's dreams, and Mary C. Cole, whose holy compassion was Britain's saving light. Most merciful Father, please, shower your abundant blessings upon each beloved viewer watching from the beautiful corners of your divine creation. Wrap their precious souls in your eternal loving embrace, shield them with your mighty wings of protection, anoint their bodies with perfect health and vitality, and flood their tender hearts with boundless joy and peace that surpasses all understanding. Guide us with your heavenly light on this blessed journey of storytelling and sharing. May your sweet, divine presence envelop us completely throughout our sacred time together today, binding our hearts as one family under your loving gaze. Amen. Now, my beloved family, my heart yearns with overwhelming love to know where each of you beautiful, precious souls is joining from. Are you blessing our gathering from the United States, home of the beautiful American beauty rose? The United Kingdom, where the Tudor rose blooms proudly? South Africa, where the magnificent King Protea grows? Canada, with its lovely white trillium? Australia, blessed with the golden wattle? The beautiful Caribbean islands, where each nation has its special flower. Jamaica, with the vibrant lignum vitae. Trinidad and Tobago, with the stunning Chaconia. Barbados, with the magnificent pride of Barbados. The Bahamas, with its lovely yellow elder. Dominica, with the Bois Quaib. St. Lucia, with the rose and marguerite. Grenada, with the bougainvillea. Or perhaps another beautiful country that cradles your precious heart. Please shower us with your divine presence in the comments below. I treasure each golden word from all of you. Whether you're embraced by a bustling city's loving arms or cradled in peaceful countryside's gentle bosom, kissed by ocean breezes' tender lips or held in majestic mountains' strong embrace. And my precious, darling family, my soul yearns with deep longing to hear your beautiful, heartfelt thoughts about our last two stories. Did they tenderly caress your angelic spirit? Which blessed moments made your heart dance with heavenly joy? Your precious golden feedback is the divine sunlight that helps our storytelling garden bloom with more magnificent beauty. Let's take attendance with overflowing love today. Please gift us with a present comment below so I can celebrate with joyful tears that you're here sharing this blessed sacred day. Remember, each one of you is an irreplaceable, priceless jewel in our family's royal crown. Your divine, radiant presence illuminates our storytelling sanctuary with heavenly light that outshines the brightest stars. With overflowing unconditional love and abundant divine blessings, Mr. Peter, please share your heartfelt precious thoughts in the comments below. Nicholas Gus's Bentley died on a remote Telluride mountain road during a violent thunderstorm. Dashboard lights flashed red before darkness enveloped him, rain pounding mercilessly against German engineering that had finally surrendered to nature's fury. His phone showed no service, $83,000 of luxury rendered useless by a mountain storm. Through sheets of rain, he spotted a single light on the hillside. His Italian leather shoes became mud-soaked disasters as he trudged uphill, his Armani suit plastered to his skin, corporate invincibility stripped away with each step. The cabin door opened before his knuckles fully connected with the wood. A woman stood in the threshold, petite yet somehow commanding the space. Paint-splattered jeans, oversized sweater slipping off one shoulder, dark hair in untamed waves. No makeup, yet her face glowed warm in the amber cabin light. "Your car?" she asked, voice melodic and direct. "Dead on the road," Nicholas replied, swallowing involuntarily. Her eyes, amber with gold flecks, assessed him, without the deference his wealth usually commanded. "You're a long way from wherever you belong," she observed without judgment. "Come in before hypothermia makes this conversation considerably less interesting." Inside, canvases leaned against rough-hewn walls, brushes soaked in jars of turpentine, and handmade bookshelves buckled under hundreds of volumes. No screens interrupted the space, just a cast-iron stove radiating heat and the scent of herbs permeating the air. "The bathroom's through there. Towels in the cabinet. I can lend you some dry clothes. My brother leaves things here sometimes." She moved to a small kitchenette, filling a dented copper kettle. Tea helps with shock, even the kind that comes from expensive mechanical failures. The borrowed flannel and denim felt foreign against his skin, but dryness overruled dignity. When he emerged, she placed a steaming mug before him, hand-thrown ceramic, beautifully imperfect. "I have a phone," she mentioned. "Landline. Service gets temperamental during storms, though." Instead of demanding immediate assistance, Nicholas heard himself say, "I'll try tomorrow." "If that's all right." Surprise flickered across her face. "Telluride gets possessive during storms. Sometimes it refuses to let people leave before they've properly arrived." She introduced herself as Esther Moon. That night, as thunder shook the cabin's timbers, conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Not about markets or acquisitions, but shared childhood constellations viewed from different hemispheres. Superior climbing trees, oak versus maple. Abandoned dreams. Her ballet aspirations cut short by wrong proportions. His secret desire to captain sailing vessels before finance claimed him. "I was going to dance with the Royal Ballet," Esther admitted, cradling her tea. "I had the discipline, even the talent. What I lacked was the proper body type. At 13, those words devastate your universe." "So you found a different art," Nicholas observed, glancing at surrounding canvases. "Art found me," she corrected. "I was angry at first, throwing paint like weapons. Then I realized creation heals more effectively than destruction." "More profitably too," Nicholas remarked, calculating market value automatically. Esther's genuine laugh startled him. "You think I make money from this? Does this cabin scream commercial success?" "You know my name," he noted, surprised. "Your face has appeared in enough financial publications. I may live remotely, but I'm not completely disconnected." Nicholas found himself sharing his father's bankruptcy, his mother's retreat into prescription medications, his teenage vow never to experience financial vulnerability again. "So the suits and car and watch," Esther noted, gaze dropping to his bare wrist. "They're armor, not accessories." For the first time in 14 years, Nicholas had removed his Patek Philippe, placing it face down on a knotted pine table. Time became irrelevant, measured instead by Esther's animated descriptions of mountain seasons and returning hummingbirds, recognizing her feeder. "They remember," she insisted, eyes bright with conviction. Tiny brains, but extraordinary memory for what matters. When was the last time you felt genuinely present? She asked later. Not calculating next moves or reviewing past decisions, just existing within a moment. The question penetrated deeper than anticipated. Nicholas searched recent memory and found only strategic interactions, business dinners serving specific purposes, sexual encounters without emotional connection, even vacations scheduled with meticulous efficiency. "I can't recall," he admitted, honesty surprising himself. "Then consider this storm a cosmic intervention," Esther suggested, adding wood to the stove. As midnight approached, she transformed her sofa into a bed, layering blankets with stories. One hand-stitched by her grandmother during cancer treatments, another bartered from a local shepherd for painting his daughter's portrait. "Most people buy bedding at department stores," Nicholas observed. "Most people miss the comfort of sleeping beneath stories," Esther countered. "These blankets have witnessed birth, death, survival. They carry more than warmth." As she turned to leave, Nicholas caught her wrist, their first physical contact. Her pulse fluttered beneath his fingers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for shelter, for conversation without agenda." Esther's expression softened. "We all need sanctuary occasionally, Nicholas, even those who build fortresses around themselves." That night, Nicholas dreamed not of markets or mergers, but of amber eyes that saw him, perhaps for the first time since childhood, as simply human. Morning arrived with crystalline mountain sunshine. Esther already worked at her easel, brush strokes transforming blank canvas into vibrant emotion. Nicholas observed silently, reluctant to interrupt her flow. In boardrooms, he commanded immediate attention. Here, in borrowed clothes with sleep-tousled hair, he felt strangely invisible and unexpectedly comfortable with that temporary insignificance. "Coffee's hot, mugs above the sink," she eventually said without breaking rhythm. The domestic simplicity of pouring his own coffee, no assistant anticipating his needs, felt foreign yet satisfying. The first sip revealed complex richness surpassing his usual premium blend. "Local roaster," Esther explained. "Former investment banker who escaped Wall Street after his third divorce, found happiness in beans instead of bonds." Approaching her canvas cautiously, Nicholas observed the painting captured last night's storm through emotional impression rather than literal representation. Violent brushstrokes in midnight blues and threatening purples conveyed nature's power, while a singular point of warm gold represented her cabin's light cutting through darkness. "That tiny spark," he noted. "It's hope amid chaos." Something shifted in Esther's expression, surprise followed by reassessment. Most people see only the storm's drama. They miss the counterpoint completely. The phone worked that morning. Esther offered to walk with him to town, where she taught an afternoon workshop. Together, they descended the mountain path. When they reached his disabled Bentley, forlorn against the rugged landscape, Nicholas felt unexpected detachment from its symbolic importance. Harvey, a silver-haired mechanical savant, promised repairs within 48 hours. The town's hotel offered comfortable accommodation. Esther's workshop students welcomed Nicholas as an observer to their painting session. Watching her teach revealed another dimension, patient yet demanding, balancing technical instruction with emotional encouragement, coaxing genuine creativity from amateur artists. "Dinner," she suggested afterward. "The cafe makes exceptional trout, unless you've arranged other plans." The invitation contained no pressure, yet represented something significant, voluntary extension of connection after practical necessity had ended. "I'd like that," Nicholas replied, closing the notebook where he'd surprised himself by sketching. "Very much." As golden hour descended over Telluride, they shared conversation across a wooden table. Esther described her journey: prestigious art school, followed by deliberate retreat from commercial success, teaching instead of pursuing gallery representation, creating for personal expression rather than market value. You've built your life according to internal rather than external metrics, Nicholas observed. I've spent decades doing precisely the opposite. And which approach has yielded greater satisfaction? Esther asked without judgment. The question lingered as sunset yielded to evening stars. Later, in his hotel room, Nicholas gazed toward the mountain where chance had delivered him into unexpected connection. Tomorrow, Harvey would resurrect his Bentley. Tomorrow, cell service would reconnect him to obligations and expectations. Yet something fundamental had shifted within his reality. Like tectonic plates beneath the Earth's surface, imperceptible movement with profound consequences. His phone suddenly chimed, service restored, delivering accumulated notifications. Among dozens of messages from associates and assistants, one text appeared from an unknown local number. The hummingbirds return in May. Consider yourself invited to witness. M. Nicholas smiled in the darkened room, possibility expanding like the vast starscape above Telluride's sheltered valley. For the first time in decades, tomorrow's certainties felt less compelling than unwritten potential. Chapter 2. Lingering Whispers. The Telluride business meeting proceeded without significance. Signatures exchanged, handshakes performed, obligations fulfilled. Yet Nicholas found himself distracted, his mind repeatedly drifting to a cabin where time moved differently, where conversations held no strategic purpose, where amber eyes saw beyond his carefully constructed facade. "Are you with us, Mr. Gus?" his partner asked, noticing his uncharacteristic distraction. "Of course," he replied automatically. But the truth hung silently between them. He was not. Back in Manhattan, Nicholas re-immersed himself in familiar rhythms. The penthouse overlooking Central Park, the office commanding sweeping city views, the restaurants requiring reservations months in advance. Yet something fundamental had shifted during those 48 hours in Telluride, a hairline fracture in his perception that widened daily. He found himself pausing during his morning coffee, watching sunlight create prismatic patterns through crystal glassware. During board meetings, his attention occasionally drifted to the quality of light filtering through skyscraper windows rather than projected profit margins. At night, the expensive sheets of his king-sized bed felt suddenly hollow, without stories woven into their fabric. Esther's voice echoed in unexpected moments, her laugh during quiet elevator rides, her philosophical questions during midnight whiskey contemplations, the casual way she dismissed financial success as a meaningful metric. Your current endeavor, does it bring genuine satisfaction or merely strategic advantage? He found himself asking a startup entrepreneur seeking investment. The young man's startled expression mirrored what Nicholas imagined had been his own when Esther posed similar questions. He'd left his business card on her kitchen table before departing Telluride, a simple gesture containing complex invitation. Week after week passed without communication. Pride prevented him from making further overture, a new sensation for a man accustomed to pursuing acquisitions with relentless determination. "You seem different," observed his executive assistant, a woman who'd organized his professional life for 11 years. "More present." The observation stung with its accuracy. Esther's question about presence had infected his consciousness like a persistent virus, impossible to extract. 3 months after Telluride, an exclusive gallery opening found Nicholas examining abstract landscapes with newfound appreciation. The artist, celebrated for emotional interpretation rather than technical precision, captured mountain storms with violent intensity. "Reminds me of Esther Moon's work," Nicholas commented to his companion, a sleek marketing executive whose company he'd been enjoying casually. "Who?" she asked, perfectly manicured fingers adjusting designer eyewear. A painter in Colorado. Extraordinary talent without corresponding recognition. The woman's interest immediately shifted to approaching celebrities, but Nicholas remained transfixed by canvas violence illuminated by single points of light, so similar to what he'd witnessed on Esther's easel that morning after the storm. Autumn painted Central Park in amber and russet hues that reminded him of Esther's eyes. Winter descended with crystalline precision, transforming Manhattan into monochromatic elegance that echoed the Telluride landscape. Spring arrived bearing whispers of renewal. May approached, the month of returning hummingbirds. The invitation embedded in Esther's text message pulsed with increasing urgency as the calendar advanced. Nicholas found himself standing in his office on a radiant spring morning, gazing across Manhattan's jagged skyline while his financial advisor droned about diversification strategies. "Cancel everything for the next week," he announced abruptly, turning from the window with sudden decision. "Sir?" The advisor blinked in confusion. "The Shanghai merger requires—" "Others can handle it," Nicholas interrupted, surprise at his own words rippling through him. "Something more important requires my attention." Hours later, his private jet cut through pristine skies toward Colorado. Unlike his previous journey, no business obligations justified this trip. No meetings required physical presence, only an inexplicable gravity pulling him back to a mountain cabin and its enigmatic occupant. The Bentley, fully repaired and shipped back to New York months earlier, remained garaged. Instead, Nicholas rented a modest SUV better suited to mountain terrain. The vehicle felt strangely appropriate, its utilitarian design matching his deliberate casual attire: jeans and button-down shirt, no tie, no cufflinks, no armor. This time, he walked the mile from town rather than driving directly to her cabin. The path wound through spring-awakened forest, wildflowers emerging from winter dormancy, birdsong replacing storm thunder. With each step, Manhattan's rigid demands receded further into irrelevance. The cabin appeared exactly as memory preserved it. Weathered wood, harmonizing with natural surroundings rather than dominating them. Smoke curled from the chimney despite warm afternoon temperatures. The porch held two mismatched chairs where previously there had been none. Standing before her door felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, known territory yet fraught with new uncertainty. Nicholas hesitated before knocking, unfamiliar nervousness constricting his throat. What explanation could possibly justify his unannounced appearance? What words could bridge 6 months of silence? Before he could retreat, the door opened. Esther stood barefoot on the threshold, paintbrush in hand, overalls spattered with fresh color. Her hair, slightly longer than he remembered, was carelessly gathered in a messy knot atop her head. No makeup adorned her features, yet her skin glowed with health and vibrancy. Recognition, surprise, and something unidentifiable flashed across her expression. "I thought corporate titans were too busy for social calls," she said, but her smile betrayed her. "I'm not here on business," Nicholas replied, heart hammering against his ribs. Her gaze held his for 3 eternal heartbeats before she stepped aside, silently inviting him to cross the threshold, separating their worlds once again. Inside, nothing had changed. The same books, the same mismatched furniture. New paintings lined the walls, vibrant with colors he hadn't seen in Manhattan's monochrome landscape. One canvas immediately captured his attention, a solitary figure in a tailored suit, standing amid mountain wilderness, caught between worlds, face turned toward distant peaks rather than the city barely visible at the composition's edge. "You painted me," he observed quietly. "I painted the concept you represent," Esther corrected, setting down her brush. "The man who arrived during the storm wasn't the same one who departed 2 days later." "He's not the same man standing here now either," Nicholas admitted. the truth emerging without calculation. Esther studied him with the penetrating gaze that had haunted his dreams for months. "Why did you return, Nicholas?" A dozen practiced responses, charming, witty, strategically ambiguous, died unspoken. Instead, raw honesty emerged. "Because nothing has felt real since I left this cabin, because my world of concrete certainties suddenly lacks substance, while this," he gestured to the simple space surrounding them, "contains something essential I can't name but desperately need." Esther's expression softened, vulnerability replacing her guarded welcome. "They returned yesterday," she said, moving toward the window. "The hummingbirds. Their wings catch morning light like living prisms. I thought of you when they arrived." That evening, beneath a sky brimming with stars he'd forgotten existed, Nicholas dropped to one knee. No ring. He somehow knew Esther wouldn't want diamonds, just raw, unfiltered truth. "I've spent my life accumulating wealth and power," he confessed, "but I've never felt truly rich until I met you. Marry me, Esther Moon." Her silence stretched between them, vast as the cosmos above. Finally, she touched his cheek, her fingers cool against his skin. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." Chapter 3. Conditions of the Soul. Dawn broke with fierce clarity, mountain air crystalline and unforgiving in its purity. Nicholas woke on Esther's sofa, the same makeshift bed from their first encounter, to find her already absent from the cabin. Through the window, he spotted her silhouette on the porch, painting with violent intensity as sunrise ignited the landscape. He watched, transfixed, as her brush moved with almost brutal precision, stabbing, sweeping, caressing the canvas in turns. Her entire body participated in creation, rocking forward to apply delicate details, stepping back to assess composition, occasionally using fingers directly on wet paint to blend transitions. This wasn't calculated art. This was visceral communication. Silently, Nicholas prepared coffee, the domestic action feeling strangely natural despite its novelty. When he finally stepped onto the porch, she acknowledged him without breaking rhythm, colors emerging beneath her hands with hypnotic certainty. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, voice husky with emotion. "My thoughts required expression beyond words." The canvas revealed turbulent blues and purples reminiscent of their storm night, but central to the composition blazed an incandescent gold, not a mere point of light, but an expanding radiance threatening to consume surrounding darkness. Hope transforming into something dangerously powerful. When she finally set down her brushes, hands stained with blues and purples, she turned to face him directly. Her expression conveyed neither joy nor rejection, only profound consideration. "I've lived alone since I was 20, she began, accepting the coffee mug he offered. "Not from lack of opportunity, but choice. My art demands solitude." Or so I believed. Nicholas waited, recognizing the weight of her words deserved patient silence. "The night you arrived, drenched and disoriented, something changed. For weeks after you left, I couldn't paint. Nothing felt authentic anymore." She met his gaze directly, unflinching. "You disrupted my world, Nicholas Gus." "I intended to," he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "Did you? Or did something larger than both of us orchestrate that storm, that car failure, that moment of chance?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer, yet essential to acknowledge. Esther set down her mug, fingers still stained with creative evidence. "I've watched people surrender to passion before. It burns hot, then extinguishes when confronted with routine existence. What you're offering isn't just marriage. It's collision between worlds that operate on fundamentally different principles." "You fear I'll pull you into mine," Nicholas observed. "I fear we'll destroy each other trying to merge incompatible realities," she corrected. Your world measures value in acquisition and influence, mine in authentic expression and internal peace. The businessman in Nicholas wanted to counter with logical arguments, strategic compromises. Instead, he found himself asking, what would make it possible? Esther's gaze intensified, searching for deception or manipulation in his expression and finding none. Is that a genuine question or negotiation tactic? It's recognition that what I want most cannot be purchased or acquired through conventional means, he replied, unprecedented vulnerability coating each word. Tell me your conditions, Esther. Not so I can strategize around them, but so I can understand what truly matters to you. She circled the porch, considering his request with the same deliberate attention she gave her creative work. Finally, she stopped directly before him, close enough that he could see individual gold flecks in her amber irises. I don't need your money or status. I need your presence. Romantic nights beneath these stars, mornings tangled in sheets, conversations that last until dawn. Her voice hardened with sudden intensity. Promise me your time, your actual undivided attention, and I'll say yes. The businessman in him wanted to negotiate terms, establish parameters. How much time constituted presence? Which days required physical proximity? What exceptions might apply during critical business periods? But the man, the actual human beneath tailored suits and strategic calculations, simply nodded. You have my word, he vowed, understanding instinctively that any attempt to quantify or qualify would betray the essence of her request. Something shifted in Esther's expression, wariness yielding to cautious acceptance, then blooming into something more profound. Her paint-stained hand rose to his cheek, leaving faint blue impressions against his skin, a primal marking more significant than any wedding band. Then yes, she whispered, voice breaking slightly. I'll marry you, Nicholas. Their lips met with electric certainty, not the tentative exploration of new lovers, but the profound recognition of souls identifying their counterpart. His hands threaded through her wind-tangled hair as hers gripped his shoulders with almost painful intensity. They stumbled inside, garments abandoned without ceremony. In daylight, their bodies revealed contrasting truths, his bearing the pampered perfection of expensive fitness regimens and dietary precision, hers marked with the authentic history of creative existence, a scar along her thigh from a climbing accident, calluses on her fingers from paintbrushes and carpentry, the slight asymmetry of her collarbone, broken during childhood and healed imperfectly. Nicholas mapped these physical narratives with reverent attention. His fingers traced the slight curve of her abdomen, soft and human, rather than sculpted into artificial perfection. His lips discovered the sensitive hollow behind her ear that made her breath catch and release in vulnerable surrender. You see me? She gasped against his shoulder, the simple observation containing profound revelation. Not what I represent or symbolize, just me. Their union transcended physical pleasure, embodying the merging of disparate worlds they had intellectually questioned. Her sighs mixed with the mountain breeze drifting through open windows. They moved together like waves against shore, inevitable, powerful, perfect. Afterward, watching sunlight paint golden patterns across her bare shoulder, Nicholas understood why poets wrote of love. For the first time in his meticulously planned existence, tomorrow's concerns held no power over tonight's joy. What happens now? Esther asked, without lifting her head from his chest, her heartbeat still synchronizing with his. Whatever we decide, he replied, fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. We write our own rules. She raised herself on one elbow to study his face, searching for insincerity and finding none. Even if those rules defy conventional expectations. Especially then, Nicholas confirmed, surprising himself with how completely he meant it. The conventional path led me to every success except the one that actually matters. Esther's smile, radiant with unhidden emotion, transformed her features from merely beautiful to transcendent. "Then we begin our greatest creative collaboration," she declared. "A life designed by choice rather than obligation." As late afternoon sunlight filtered through cabin windows, casting their entwined forms in amber illumination, Nicholas experienced a sensation he'd forgotten existed: absolute contentment uncomplicated by acquisition or achievement. In that moment of perfect stillness, he finally understood what he'd been unconsciously seeking beneath the relentless pursuit of empire. Not power, not validation, not even success. Simply this: authentic connection that rendered external measurements meaningless. Chapter 4. Seasons of Separation. For 2 years, Nicholas maintained a delicate balance between worlds that had never been designed to intersect. Weekdays commanding boardrooms in tailored Armani, weekends lost in Esther's embrace, wearing faded denim. The dichotomy both exhausted and exhilarated him. Private jets became his chariots between realities, departing Manhattan's concrete canyons each Friday afternoon, reluctantly returning each Monday dawn. His executive team adapted to his unconventional schedule with varying degrees of acceptance. Some respected his newfound boundaries, others whispered about priorities and commitment. "They're questioning your dedication," his CFO warned during a particularly tense acquisition negotiation. "Competitors sense vulnerability in your absence." "Let them," Nicholas replied with newfound serenity. True vulnerability lies in surrendering to a single dimension of existence. In Telluride, their relationship deepened beyond initial passion into something more substantial. He learned to identify native plants and constellations. She tolerated his incessant email checking and occasional conference calls. They built a separate, sacred reality within her cabin walls, one where professional identities yielded to authentic humanity. "I never understood the concept of home before you," Nicholas confessed one evening as they watched sunset paint the mountains in impossible pinks and golds. "I owned properties, maintained residences, but this," he gestured to their simple surroundings, "this is the first place I've ever belonged." Esther's fingers interlaced with his, her wedding band a simple silver band rather than expected diamond. "Home isn't location," she murmured. "It's where separation between self and surroundings dissolves." Their marriage ceremony had reflected this philosophy, intimate and uncommercial, held beneath ancient pines with only mountain witnesses. No designer dress, no elaborate reception, no performative traditions. Just authentic vows exchanged between souls who'd recognized their counterparts across impossibly different landscapes. The compromise functioned with surprising effectiveness until the letter arrived. Formal stationery embossed with a family crest Esther had never mentioned. The envelope appeared on their cabin table during a typical Friday arrival, its presence announcing disruption before its contents were revealed. "My grandmother is dying," Esther explained that evening, voice hollow with contained grief. "The family matriarch. She's asking to meet you before." The sentence remained unfinished, too painful to complete. Nicholas set down his reading glasses, confusion evident. "Your family knows about me." Esther's expression reflected complex emotions: guilt, hesitation, protective instinct. "They know I love someone," she replied simply. "They want a wedding while grandmother can attend. But we're already married," Nicholas noted, puzzlement deepening. "They don't know that." Esther's gaze dropped to her hands, uncharacteristic uncertainty evident in her posture. "There's something I haven't told you about my family." What followed shattered Nicholas's assumptions about his wife's history. The cabin, her seemingly simple existence, these were choices rather than circumstances. Esther Moon had been born Esther Montgomery Wells, granddaughter to one of Colorado's founding mining dynasties, heiress to generational wealth, that rivaled his self-made fortune. "You deliberately misled me," Nicholas realized, hurt evident beneath careful control. "I never lied," Esther countered. "I chose a life unburdened by expectations and inheritance. I changed my name legally at 23, walked away from trust funds and family politics. My art needed authenticity, not pedigree. And us? Was I an experiment in slumming with ordinary self-made wealth?" The accusation escaped before he could contain it. Esther's eyes flashed with rare anger. "That's beneath you, Nicholas. I fell in love with the man who appeared during a storm, vulnerable, stripped of context. Would you have seen me clearly if you'd known my background first?" The question penetrated his defensive reaction, forcing uncomfortable honesty. "Probably not," he admitted. "I'd have approached you strategically, calculating advantages and connections." Her expression softened. "Exactly as I'd have evaluated your portfolio and influence had we met through family connections. We found each other as humans first, without biographical contamination." Understanding gradually replaced hurt, as Nicholas recognized the gift in her omission. "Your grandmother, she's important to you. She supported my escape from family expectations," Esther explained. "Funded my art education secretly when my parents refused. Respected my need for independence, even when she couldn't fully comprehend it." Her voice broke slightly. "She's the only one who never tried to force me back into their world." That night, watching Esther sleep, Nicholas made the hardest decision of his life. For her, he would sacrifice anything, even the company he'd built from nothing. His fingers traced gentle patterns across her bare shoulder, memorizing the texture of her skin bathed in moonlight. "Whatever you need," he whispered to her sleeping form. "However you need it." Their wedding unfolded at the Montgomery Wells estate, a sprawling historic property nestled within private mountain acreage. Esther's relatives, educated, cultured, and startlingly similar to Nicholas's social circle, welcomed him with knowing smiles and calculating assessment. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fallen in love with a woman, deliberately escaping exactly the world he'd spent his life struggling to enter. "She finally found someone worthy," her grandmother whispered during the reception, frail hands clasping his with surprising strength. The elderly woman's eyes, the same striking amber as Esther's, held wisdom accumulated across 9 decades. "Take care with her heart. It breaks only once." "I'll protect it with everything I possess," Nicholas vowed, the promise transcending polite social interaction. "Not by possessing," the old woman corrected with startling perception. "By releasing. The Montgomery women require freedom to thrive, a lesson 4 generations of husbands learned painfully." 2 weeks later, Esther packed essential belongings, her paints, cherished books, the quilt that had first sheltered Nicholas during the storm. The cabin door closed behind them with definitive finality. "Your turn to show me your world," she said, sliding into the passenger seat of his rented car. Despite her brave smile, Nicholas detected apprehension beneath her composed exterior. Manhattan welcomed them with characteristic indifference, another power couple among millions occupying rarefied penthouses and exclusive social circles. Nicholas installed Esther in his residence with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist design. She immediately transformed one room into a studio, bringing explosive color to his monochromatic existence. For 8 blissful weeks, they explored the city together. Quiet museums on weekday mornings, hidden restaurants with renowned chefs, Central Park at dawn when joggers outnumbered tourists. Nicholas showed her every beautiful secret New York offered beyond obvious commercial attractions. Esther approached his world with characteristic openness, neither intimidated by wealth nor impressed by status symbols. She challenged his colleagues' assumptions during dinner parties, questioned investment priorities during casual conversations, introduced uncomfortable ethical considerations into previously straightforward business discussions. "Your wife is certainly unique," commented his board chairman, after a particularly pointed exchange about environmental impact of recent acquisitions. "Precisely why I married her," Nicholas replied with genuine pride. But beneath their apparent adaptation lurked warning signs neither acknowledged. Esther's paintings darkened in tone and theme, urban claustrophobia replacing mountain expansiveness. Nicholas's once compartmentalized schedule began bleeding across boundaries. Urgent calls interrupting weekend intimacy, critical meetings requiring gradual extension of Manhattan residency. Then reality intruded with unforgiving absolutism. The merger appeared without warning, a hostile takeover threatening everything Nicholas had built. Emergency board meetings replaced romantic dinners. Late-night strategy sessions consumed weekends once reserved for Esther's embrace. The delicate balance between worlds tilted precariously toward collapse. "It's temporary," he promised, kissing her goodbye before another dawn departure. "Just until we stabilize." The lie wasn't intentional. He believed his own reassurance, even as market realities contradicted it. Esther nodded understanding, her expression carefully neutral as another weekend yielded to corporate crisis. Alone in their penthouse, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow without shared experience to animate it, she turned to her canvas, the only truth she could still access amid growing disconnection. Her brush moved with violent certainty across blank expanse, colors darker than she'd used in years, emerging beneath deliberate strokes. The painting took shape without conscious planning, a solitary figure standing between two landscapes, facing impossible choice between worlds that refused integration. As moonlight washed across Manhattan's glittering skyline, Esther confronted the emerging truth her art revealed before her conscious mind could accept it. Some chasms, despite love's sincere intention, remained fundamentally uncrossable. Chapter 5. Fracture Lines. The merger appeared without warning, a hostile takeover threatening everything Nicholas had built. Emergency board meetings replaced romantic dinners. Late-night strategy sessions consumed weekends once reserved for Esther's embrace. "It's temporary," he promised, kissing her goodbye before another dawn departure. "Just until we stabilize." Esther nodded, understanding at first. She explored museums alone, started a new painting series, wrote long letters to her grandmother. But days stretched to weeks, weeks to months. Nicholas arrived home after midnight, exhausted and preoccupied, his mind never fully present even when physically beside her. One evening, she found him asleep on the sofa, still in his suit, financial reports scattered across imported marble. She removed his shoes, loosened his tie, placed a blanket over his exhausted form. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. The screen revealed 17 missed calls, 42 unread messages. "I'm losing you," she whispered to his sleeping form. "Not to another woman or even to failure, but to the very success you've pursued relentlessly." Their first serious argument erupted 3 months into the crisis, after Nicholas cancelled their anniversary plans, a weekend retreat to Vermont's autumn splendor, for an emergency investor meeting. "You promised me your time," Esther reminded him, voice trembling with restraint as she stood in their bedroom doorway. "Not your leftovers after work consumes everything meaningful." Nicholas looked up from packing his briefcase, fatigue etched into features once animated by passion. "This isn't a hobby I can reschedule," he snapped, immediately regretting his tone but too exhausted to moderate it. "Thousands of jobs, including mine, depend on my decisions right now. And what about us? What about your promise?" Her question carried no accusation, only profound sadness that penetrated his defensive irritation. Nicholas crossed the room, reaching for her hands, which she did not withdraw but left limp within his grasp. "Esther, please understand. Once this crisis passes, there will be another," she interrupted with quiet certainty. "There's always another crisis, another deal, another obligation more urgent than connection." "That's unfair," he countered, defensive anger rising. "I've restructured my entire professional existence to accommodate our relationship." Something flashed in Esther's eyes. Not anger, but disappointment more devastating than rage. "Accommodate," she repeated, the word hanging between them, "as if loving me is an inconvenience requiring scheduling adjustments rather than the central purpose you claimed it to be." "That's not what I meant." "It's precisely what you meant," Esther corrected. "Your words reveal your true priorities when exhaustion strips away polite pretense." That night, attempting reconciliation, Nicholas reached for her in bed. His lips sought hers with desperation, born of guilt and desire. His hands traced familiar paths across her body, seeking the connection that had always transcended verbal misunderstanding. Esther turned away, creating inches of separation that felt like uncrossable chasms. "Don't," she whispered, the single syllable breaking with emotion. "Not when you're already planning tomorrow's meeting in your mind." Her rejection, gentle but firm, cut deeper than anger would have. Because she was right. Even in their most intimate moments, his thoughts drifted to spreadsheets and stock projections, contingency plans and market strategies. Weeks passed in cold politeness. Professional necessity kept Nicholas locked in 16-hour workdays, while Esther retreated into artistic isolation within their shared space. Her paintings darkened. Once vibrant canvases, now dominated by stormy greys and midnight blues, shadowy figures trapped between worlds that refused integration. Nicholas noticed but said nothing, afraid acknowledgement might shatter their fragile détente. Instead, he left expensive gifts, jewelry she never wore, designer clothes that remained tagged in closets, rare first editions she didn't open. Material offerings that once would have seemed ludicrously inadequate to him now represented his desperate attempt to bridge growing distance. Then came the Tokyo crisis, a key component of their defensive strategy against the hostile takeover. 3 weeks abroad, minimum. "Come with me," he suggested half-heartedly, already knowing her answer. "And do what?" Esther asked, arms crossed as she leaned against the doorframe of her studio. Paint stained her fingers, permanent blue marking her wedding band hand like a competing claim. "Watch you work from a different hotel room? No thank you." The distance between them, physical, emotional, philosophical, expanded with each passing day of separation. Nicholas found himself standing in Tokyo skyscrapers, gazing across foreign skylines while negotiating complex financial maneuvers by day and lying awake in luxury hotels by night. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd achieved his greatest professional success precisely when his personal life began unraveling. During the 3rd week of separation, a text message appeared at what was midnight in Manhattan. "Your world requires constant vigilance. Mine requires genuine presence. I don't think either of us can sustain the compromise anymore." The 11-hour time difference prevented immediate response. By the time Nicholas called, Esther's phone went straight to voicemail. His messages remained unread, emails unanswered. When he returned, jet-lagged but triumphant, having salvaged the deal and neutralized the takeover threat, their penthouse felt different immediately. Something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere, molecules rearranged in his absence. Esther's paintings were missing from the walls, her clothes absent from their shared closet. The studio door stood open, supplies packed in orderly boxes. She sat waiting on their balcony, expression unreadable against the Manhattan skyline she'd never fully embraced. Her hair, longer now than when they'd met, caught sunset light with golden highlights that reminded him painfully of that first morning in her cabin. "I want a divorce," she said simply, the words carrying no anger, only finality. "I won't be an afterthought in my own marriage." Nicholas felt the world tilt beneath him, a sensation entirely foreign to a man whose existence had been built on calculated certainty. "Esther, please. The crisis is resolved now. We can return to—" "To what?" she interrupted, rising from her chair to face him directly. "To scheduled intimacy between acquisitions? To passion postponed until markets close? To conversations interrupted by urgent calls?" Her voice remained steady despite the devastation of her words. "I've watched you check your phone during sunsets, Nicholas. I've felt your mind wander during lovemaking. I've seen your attention fragment during conversations that once consumed you completely." "I can change," he insisted, reaching for her hands, which she permitted him to hold. "One last connection before separation. Now that the company's secure—" "This isn't about your company," Esther interrupted with gentle precision. "It's about capacity. Your soul requires achievement to breathe. Mine requires presence." Her thumb brushed across his knuckles in tender farewell. "We were magnificent, Nicholas, but magnificence that cannot sustain becomes merely painful memory." "Don't do this," he whispered, unfamiliar desperation constricting his throat. "Give me another chance. One real chance now that external pressure has lifted." Something softened in Esther's expression. Not reconsideration, but compassion. "The pressure hasn't lifted, my love. It's simply transformed. There will always be another deal, another challenge, another mountain requiring conquest." Her fingers slipped from his grasp as she stepped back. "I can't compete with your fundamental nature any more than you could contain mine." "Where will you go?" he asked, professional composure shattered by personal devastation. "Back to what's real," she replied simply. "Back to mountains that remain when markets fall. Back to art that requires no quarterly projections to justify existence." Nicholas watched her gather the few remaining possessions: her grandmother's silver hairbrush, a small wooden box containing riverstones collected during their early hikes, the first sketch he'd made of her sleeping form. "You're not taking your paintings," he observed, noting the canvases still stacked against the studio wall. "They belong to this chapter," Esther replied without turning, "to this version of us. Let them remind you that beauty emerged even amid misaligned purpose." At the door, she paused, not with uncertainty, but with final offering. "I never regretted loving you, Nicholas. Even knowing this outcome, I would choose that storm again, that failed car, that night of revelation. Some magnificence justifies its eventual cost." The door closed with quiet finality rather than dramatic slam. Nicholas remained frozen, unable to pursue or protest. Something fundamental in her departure demanded respect rather than resistance. That night, alone in their designer bed that suddenly felt vast and empty, Nicholas faced the truth her absence revealed. He had achieved everything he'd ever pursued professionally: market dominance, financial security, industry respect, while losing the only thing that had ever transformed success from achievement into meaning. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan continued its relentless rhythm. Lights blinking across skyscrapers, traffic flowing through gridded streets, commerce proceeding with mechanical indifference to individual pain. The empire he'd built stood intact, more secure than ever after surviving attempted hostile takeover. Yet the emperor himself sat hollow in his high tower, surrounded by conquered territory that suddenly held no significance whatsoever. Chapter 6. Shattered Reflections. The divorce proceedings lasted longer than their marriage. Nicholas offered generous settlements. Esther refused them all. She wanted nothing from him, not alimony, not property, not even the expensive jewelry he'd given her, despite knowing she rarely wore it. "I just want out," she told her lawyer, while Nicholas listened, heart constricting. "Clean break." Her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman with impeccable credentials, seemed perplexed by her client's refusal of entitled assets. "Ms. Moon, you're legally entitled to significant compensation," the lawyer insisted during mediation. "Your husband's net worth increased substantially during your marriage." "I contributed nothing to that increase," Esther replied with characteristic directness. "And I have no interest in resources I didn't earn. The law doesn't require—" "I'm not concerned with legal entitlements," Esther interrupted, "only moral ones." Across the polished conference table, Nicholas watched the exchange with complex emotions churning beneath his carefully maintained professional facade. Pride in her integrity competed with frustration at her stubborn refusal of security he desperately wanted to provide. "At least take the cabin," he suggested, speaking directly to her for the first time in weeks. "I purchased it when the previous owners listed it. It's yours, no strings attached." Surprise flickered across Esther's features, quickly replaced by something harder. "You bought my home without telling me? While we were still married?" Nicholas hadn't anticipated her reaction. Anger where he'd expected gratitude. "I wanted to protect what mattered to you," he explained, belatedly recognizing his misstep. "By secretly acquiring it? By assuming ownership of my sacred space without consultation?" Each question emerged with increasing intensity. "That cabin represented my independence, Nicholas, my deliberate choice of simplicity over inheritance, and you converted it into just another asset in your portfolio." The attorneys exchanged uncomfortable glances as personal pain erupted into what had previously been clinical proceedings. "I meant it as protection," Nicholas insisted. "The owners were selling regardless. I thought you'd want—" "You thought," Esther interrupted with devastating quietness, "but you never asked. That's been our fundamental problem all along." The divorce finalized with sterile signatures, no assets transferred, no ongoing entanglements, complete separation legally executed with the same clinical efficiency that characterized all Nicholas's business dealings. He tried reaching her afterward. Calls, messages, even flowers delivered to her newly rented Brooklyn apartment. The building doorman confirmed delivery. No acknowledgement ever came. His emails received automatic replies. "This address is no longer monitored. Please direct all communication through legal representatives." Esther remained resolute in her silence, a void more painful than active rejection. At least anger would have confirmed continued emotional connection. This absolute absence suggested something far worse. Complete indifference. Nicholas threw himself into work with renewed intensity. 80-hour weeks became 100-hour marathons. His company expanded internationally. New acquisitions in emerging markets, diversification into technology sectors, strategic partnerships with former competitors. Forbes featured him on its cover. The Ice King of Wall Street, How Tragedy Transformed Triumph. The journalist, young, ambitious, inadequately researched, had attempted exploring personal dimensions during their interview. "Some sources suggest your divorce sparked this professional renaissance. Would you say personal loss fueled your remarkable business expansion?" "Next question," Nicholas had replied with such Arctic finality that the remainder of the interview focused exclusively on market strategies and economic projections. The article noted his ruthless efficiency and emotionless decision-making, never mentioning the warmth that had briefly thawed his heart, nor the devastating frost that had reclaimed it after Esther's departure. Colleagues who had witnessed his temporary transformation commented privately on his regression to hyper-focused intensity, more extreme than before, as if compensating for momentary weakness. "It's like watching someone deliberately freeze their own heart," his CFO remarked to the board chairman after a particularly brutal restructuring meeting. "Medically fascinating, but humanly tragic." For 3 years, Nicholas attempted contact on significant dates. Her birthday, their anniversary, holidays. The messages grew increasingly minimal, from initial paragraphs of explanation and apology to eventual single lines acknowledging continued regard. No responses ever came. "She's living in Colorado again," his private investigator reported during their annual update, the only personal indulgence Nicholas permitted himself. Teaching at a small arts college in Boulder, exhibitions in regional galleries, modest success, minimal digital footprint. Is she alone? The question escaped before professional detachment could suppress it. The investigator hesitated. "She maintains private boundaries effectively, sir. No conclusive evidence of romantic entanglements, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence," Nicholas completed automatically. Understood. Something prevented him from visiting Telluride personally, from driving past her former cabin, which remained vacant after he'd gifted it to a conservation trust, or appearing at one of her exhibitions. Pride, perhaps, or fear of confirmation that some wounds never heal, that certain bridges once burned cannot be reconstructed. Then his father died. Suddenly, unexpectedly. Heart attack on the golf course at his Florida retirement community. The man who had instilled Nicholas's relentless work ethic through both example and expectation collapsed between the 7th and 8th holes. Economic theories about market efficiency, his final spoken words, according to his shocked playing partners. The funeral gathered family Nicholas barely recognized, offering condolences that felt hollow against his complicated grief. He'd provided generously for his father's retirement, yet visited infrequently. Their relationship had centered primarily on professional achievement rather than personal connection, a pattern whose consequences now emerged with painful clarity. After the service, sorting through his father's study at the executor's request, Nicholas discovered a letter addressed to him in familiar handwriting. Esther's. His father, ever the secret keeper, had apparently maintained correspondence with his ex-daughter-in-law after their separation. The envelope remained sealed, dated 18 months prior. Nicholas's hands trembled uncharacteristically as he opened it, professional composure shattering at this unexpected connection to the woman whose absence defined his existence more profoundly than her presence once had. The letter contained no dramatic revelations or emotional declarations, just simple updates about her life. A new series of paintings exploring mountain seasons, a teaching position at a local art center, her grandmother's passing, peaceful, surrounded by family, occasional references to conversations apparently shared with his father during earlier correspondence. Then, near the conclusion, one sentence that changed everything. "I still dream about the storm that brought him to my door." 10 words. No elaborate profession of continued feeling, no invitation for reconnection. Just quiet acknowledgement that memories remained intact, despite deliberate separation. For 2 days, Nicholas sat with this knowledge, turning it over like a stone in his palm, examining facets, testing weight, considering implications. Then he made arrangements with characteristic decisiveness. Indefinite leave of absence delegated to his executive team. Power of attorney assigned to his most trusted advisor. Personal matters requiring immediate attention. His board chairman, the only person who had witnessed his brief transformation during marriage, recognized the significance immediately. "You're going to Colorado," he stated rather than asked. "I'm addressing unfinished business," Nicholas replied, neither confirming nor denying. "The company will survive your absence," the older man offered. "Some pursuits justify operational disruption." 5 years after their divorce, Nicholas Gus returned to Telluride, not to her cabin, which new conservation trust ownership had returned to natural landscape, but to the small house her grandmother had left her, according to local information. Late afternoon rain began falling as he parked his rented vehicle, deliberately modest rather than ostentatious, on the quiet street outside her home. The weather intensified as he approached the door, nature's symmetry not lost on him as water soaked through his clothing. No expensive suit this time, no corporate armor, just a man drenched by the same mountain storms that had first united them. He stood motionless for several minutes, water plastering his silver-streaked hair against his forehead, courage momentarily failing despite countless high-stakes negotiations navigated with unwavering confidence. This threshold represented more consequential risk than any corporate venture ever had. The door opened before he knocked. Esther froze on the threshold, shock evident in her expression. Her hair, shorter now, styled in a practical bob that framed her face, contained more silver than he remembered. Delicate lines surrounded her eyes, evidence of 5 years' laughter and concern, joy and grief. She wore simple linen trousers and a paint-spattered sweater, bare feet connecting directly with worn wooden floors. Time suspended between them, past and potential future hovering in perfect tension. Nicholas. His name emerged as barely audible recognition rather than welcome or rejection. "I should have called first," he began, unfamiliar awkwardness replacing his customary articulate precision. Words failed. An unprecedented occurrence for a man whose verbal mastery had negotiated billion-dollar deals. In their absence, truth emerged through eyes that could no longer maintain professional detachment. Esther's expression shifted subtly, wariness yielding momentarily to something softer, more complex. "You're soaking wet," she observed, the practical concern creating safer territory than emotional confrontation. Before she could retreat behind courtesy or he could construct rational explanation, Nicholas stepped forward with uncharacteristic impulsiveness. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her against him with decisive certainty. Their lips met with 5 years of absence, compressed into a single, desperate connection. Esther's resistance lasted mere seconds before dissolving. Her fingers clutched his rain-soaked shirt, drawing him inside the threshold that had once separated their worlds so definitively. No words passed between them as they stumbled toward her bedroom, shedding defenses more significant than mere clothing. Their reunion burned with the intensity of loss reclaimed. Where their first night together had been gentle exploration, this was hungry recognition, bodies remembering what minds had tried to forget. His fingers traced pathways across her skin with reverent memory. Her hands mapped the new tension in his shoulders with both discovery and familiarity. "This changes nothing," she gasped against his neck, even as her body contradicted the assertion. "It changes everything," he countered, the certainty in his voice reflecting transformation deeper than physical connection. In the storm's crescendo, with rain lashing against windows and thunder echoing through mountain valleys, they found themselves exactly where they had begun. Strangers rendered intimate through nature's intervention, souls recognizing their counterparts across impossible division. Chapter 7. Morning Truths. Dawn illuminated unfamiliar walls. Nicholas woke first, momentarily disoriented until the weight of Esther's head on his chest anchored him to reality. He studied her sleeping face, the new fine lines around her eyes, the slight furrow between brows even in repose. 5 years etched into her features, beautiful in their honest declaration of time past. Unlike his penthouse with its automated blackout blinds, her bedroom welcomed morning light, soft amber illumination filtering through simple curtains, painting reality in gentle revelation rather than manufactured perfection. The walls displayed paintings he'd never seen, landscapes capturing Telluride seasons with mature technique that transcended the work he remembered. Her artistic evolution had continued without him, a parallel life developed in his absence. When her eyes opened, those amber irises unchanged despite surrounding evidence of time's passage, wariness immediately replaced vulnerability. She disentangled herself from his embrace, creating physical distance that reflected deeper caution. "Why now?" she asked, voice husky with sleep and emotion. After all this time, Nicholas considered diplomatic answers, convenient explanations that would present his appearance as rational decision rather than desperate pilgrimage. Instead, he offered truth. "My father died believing I was a fool," he said quietly, sitting up against the headboard. "He kept your letters. All of them." Esther's expression shifted to alarm as she pulled the sheet higher around herself, suddenly conscious of her nakedness in multiple dimensions. "I never intended—" "I know," Nicholas interrupted gently. "You weren't trying to maintain connection through him. You were being kind to an old man who once showed you kindness. That's who you are, Esther." She looked away, blinking rapidly. Sunlight caught the moisture gathering at her lashes, transforming potential tears into momentary prisms. "Last night was a mistake," she whispered. The declaration directed more toward herself than him. "We've been here before. Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Nicholas countered with quiet certainty. "I've changed." He told her then about the companies he'd sold, the board positions he'd resigned, how his empire had contracted to manageable proportions through deliberate divestment rather than market failure, how he'd installed leadership that didn't require his constant presence, creating autonomous structure that maintained profitability without consuming his existence. "Why would you dismantle what you spent your life building?" Esther asked, suspicion edging her voice. She rose from bed, wrapping herself in a worn robe that carried none of the luxury he'd once provided but somehow suited her more authentically. "Because it cost me what actually mattered," he replied simply, making no move to follow her, respecting the physical distance she established. "You were right to leave, Esther. I broke my promise. But I'm here now, fully present, asking if we might begin again." Esther moved to the window, arms crossed protectively across her chest as she gazed out at the mountains awakening under morning light. "You think it's that simple? That you can waltz back after 5 years and pick up where we left off?" "No," Nicholas admitted, unfamiliar humility replacing his customary confidence. "I expect nothing. I just needed you to know I finally understood, and that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." She turned to face him, expression guarded yet vulnerable beneath deliberate control. "What exactly did you understand, Nicholas?" "Articulate it precisely." The request contained no cruelty, only necessary verification that transformation extended beyond convenient declaration. Nicholas recognized the test beneath her question, his ability to demonstrate genuine comprehension rather than strategic maneuvering. "That presence isn't merely physical occupation of shared space," he began, careful consideration weighting each word. "That attention divided is attention denied. That achievement without purpose becomes addiction rather than accomplishment." His voice caught slightly. "That time, not money, power, or influence, is life's only true currency, and I squandered mine pursuing substitutes for genuine wealth." Something shifted in Esther's expression. Not forgiveness yet, but recognition of authentic understanding. "And your companies now? Your remaining business interests?" The questions emerged without accusation, simple assessment of potential reality. "Structured to function without continuous monitoring," Nicholas explained. "Quarterly board meetings rather than daily involvement, trusted leadership, empowered to make decisions within established parameters." He met her gaze directly. "I still care about their success, but not at the expense of actual living." Silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken pain and possibility. Through the open window, mountain air carried the scent of pine and recent rain, earth awakening to renewed potential after storm's cleansing. I need time, Esther finally said, arms still wrapped protectively around herself. This isn't a fairy tale where one passionate night erases years of hurt. What you're suggesting isn't reconciliation, it's resurrection. Dead things don't revive easily, Nicholas. He nodded, accepting her boundary without protest. Rising from bed, he gathered scattered clothing from the floor, evidence of passion's temporary victory over caution. Unlike their previous partings, no expensive suit required straightening, no corporate armor needed reinstallation, just jeans and cotton shirt, simple garments reflecting simplified existence. I've taken a house in town, he said, not approaching her despite desire to bridge physical distance between them. I'll be there if you want to talk. Esther's expression remained carefully guarded, yet something softened around her eyes. How long will you stay? The question contained no invitation, merely practical assessment, yet Nicholas recognized the significance of her asking rather than assuming his inevitable departure. As long as necessary, he replied, deliberately avoiding specific time frame that might imply pressure or limitation. As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him at the bedroom threshold. Nicholas? The single word carried complex emotion beneath apparent simplicity. When he turned to face her, vulnerability had replaced caution in her expression. I never stopped loving you either. That's what made it so damned hard. The confession hung between them, neither promise nor invitation, simply truth too essential for continued burial. Nicholas nodded once, acknowledging the gift without presuming entitlement to it. Rather than immediate enthusiasm or declarations of renewed commitment, he responded with respect for the complexity she'd identified. Then we'll proceed with appropriate care for what remains precious despite damage. Outside her house, morning painted telluride with precise detail that artificial Manhattan lighting never achieved. Residents began their daily routines, opening shops, walking dogs, greeting neighbors with genuine recognition rather than practiced courtesy. Nicholas walked toward his rented cottage with deliberate slowness, physical pace reflecting internal caution. The rented house, small by his previous standards but comfortable in authentic ways his luxury penthouse never achieved, welcomed him with simple practicality. No doorman, no security system, no imported marble or designer furnishings, just solid construction, functional space, and windows oriented toward mountain views rather than status confirmation. He prepared coffee in the small kitchen, movements deliberate and mindful rather than hurried steps toward necessary caffeine before important meetings. Steam rose from the ceramic mug, purchased from a local artisan rather than luxury retailer, carrying aromatic invitation to presence rather than mere consumption. On the small porch overlooking the valley, Nicholas sipped from the irregular vessel, its handmade imperfection somehow more satisfying than manufactured precision. For the first time in decades, his morning contained no emails requiring immediate response, no market fluctuations demanding analysis, no strategic decisions awaiting resolution, just coffee, mountains, birdsong, present reality without future projection or past regret. His phone, deliberately left on silent mode, displayed missed calls from his executive team, messages requesting guidance on matters previously requiring his immediate intervention. Instead of automatic response, Nicholas set the device aside, prioritizing the commitment he'd just articulated to Esther. Later that afternoon, walking through town with no particular destination, he encountered an elderly artist setting up an easel in the small park. The man, weathered face declaring decades of mountain existence, nodded casual greeting without recognition of Nicholas's former prominence. Good spot for capturing valley light, the artist commented, gesturing toward the mountain vista with paint-stained fingers. You know Esther Moon? Nicholas asked, curiosity overriding introduction. The old man's expression warmed with immediate recognition. Taught her years back, before she developed her particular style, remarkable talent, sees beneath surface appearance to essential truth. He studied Nicholas with sudden perception. "You're him, aren't you? The husband from back east." "Ex-husband," Nicholas corrected automatically, the designation painful despite its technical accuracy. The artist continued arranging brushes with deliberate precision. "Labels matter less than reality. You look at Telluride the way she paints it, searching for something beyond mere landscape." The observation, casually delivered yet remarkably perceptive, accompanied Nicholas through remaining afternoon wanderings. By evening, returning to his rented cottage, decision crystallized with uncharacteristic certainty, not driven by strategic calculation. For the first time in his adult life, Nicholas Gus would simply wait, allowing natural development rather than orchestrating desired outcome. Whether hours, days, weeks, or forever, he would remain present in Telluride without pressuring Esther toward reconciliation. Some damaged treasures required patient restoration rather than immediate reclamation. Some fractured connections needed gentle tending rather than forceful rejoining. The businessman who once demanded immediate results had finally learned timing's essential role in matters transcending mere transaction. As sunset painted mountains in impossible hues, Nicholas began unpacking his minimal luggage, placing clothing in drawers, arranging toiletries in bathroom, transforming temporary accommodation into intentional dwelling. The symbolic gesture represented deeper commitment than any verbal declaration. He would remain, not in desperate pursuit, but in patient presence, available without demanding, offering without expecting, loving without requiring reciprocation, however long necessary. That night, as mountain darkness descended with primal certainty, his phone illuminated with unexpected message. "Breakfast tomorrow? 8 a.m. at Morning Brew. No promises beyond coffee. M." Simple words, limited invitation, essential beginning. Chapter 8. Cautious Constellations. Esther avoided town for 2 weeks after their breakfast, a polite but guarded encounter that established tenuous reconnection without promises. She buried herself in paintings that flowed with newfound intensity. Colors she hadn't used in years reclaimed her canvases, vibrant reds, hopeful yellows, passionate purples competing with cautious blues and hesitant grays. Her brush moved with schizophrenic uncertainty, emotions battling for dominance across stretched canvas. Her students noticed the change during weekend workshops. "Your work feels different," remarked one elderly woman who'd attended her classes for years, "like it's breathing again." The observation unsettled Esther, too accurately reflecting inner turmoil. She'd constructed careful stability after their divorce, professional respect if not celebrity, creative fulfillment if not passion, comfortable solitude if not genuine peace. Nicholas's return threatened this delicate equilibrium, offering possibility that simultaneously attracted and terrified. On the 15th day, she hiked to Eagle's Point, the summit overlooking Telluride that required demanding exertion rather than casual stroll. Physical challenge had always clarified her mental landscape, sweat and strain burning away pretense and rationalization. As sunset painted the valley gold, unexpected tears blurred her vision. She'd fought so hard for independence, for emotional self-sufficiency. Yet one kiss had crumbled defenses built across 5 painful years. "Damn you, Nicholas Gus," she whispered to the empty mountainside, "for making me want impossible integration again." The small cafe where they eventually met sat on neutral ground, neither her territory nor his. Nicholas arrived early, dressed casually in jeans and a charcoal sweater she'd never seen. No luxury watch circled his wrist. No phone appeared beside his coffee cup. His hair, longer now, silver-streaked at temples, lacked the meticulous grooming she remembered. "Your hair's different," she noted, sliding into the seat across from him, deflecting deeper observations with superficial comment. Nicholas ran a self-conscious hand through the untamed strands. I fired my barber along with my corporate identity. The joke, subtle and self-deprecating, surprised a laugh from her. Genuine humor had rarely surfaced during their marriage's final months, when tension replaced playfulness, strategy overwhelmed spontaneity. You look good, she offered, the simple compliment emerging without calculation. More present in your own skin. That's the intention, he replied, studying her with equal attention. You've changed too. 5 years tends to accomplish that, Esther acknowledged, hands wrapped around her ceramic mug as if seeking warmth beyond temperature. For better or worse? Definitely better, Nicholas responded with quiet certainty. Your work has evolved. I saw the exhibition at Mountain Gallery. Surprise flickered across her features. You went to my show? Anonymously, he clarified. I didn't want to create awkwardness for you with unexpected appearance. The consideration, putting her comfort above his desire for reconnection, registered as evidence of genuine change. The Nicholas she'd married would have calculated optimal appearance for maximum impact, strategic timing to ensure advantage. They talked cautiously at first, exchanging sanitized versions of the years between them. Her art exhibits, his business transitions, neutral topics that revealed little about the emotional landscapes they'd traversed separately. Then, walking along the river after coffee had grown cold, Nicholas stopped beneath an aspen tree, autumn gold leaves trembling above them like nervous witnesses. I have a confession, he said, expression serious. I came to Telluride 3 years ago, drove all the way from Denver, sat outside your former cabin for hours before realizing new owners had moved in. Why didn't you look for me? Esther asked, stunned by this revelation of prior attempt. Cowardice, he admitted without self-justification. Fear that you'd found happiness without me, that approaching you would only reopen wounds better left healed. Esther absorbed this, momentarily speechless before offering reciprocal honesty. I drove past your Manhattan building during an art showing in Soho. The confession emerged quietly. Sat in a rental car across the street, watching your penthouse windows, wondering if another woman slept in what had briefly been our bed. There was no one, Nicholas clarified, answering her unasked question. Not even casually? Disbelief colored her tone. Physical release without emotional connection lost appeal after experiencing genuine integration, he replied simply. Corporate success proved poor substitute for authentic partnership. That evening morphed into others, careful meetings where they rediscovered each other slowly, museum visits, hikes along familiar trails, dinners where conversation flowed more freely with each passing hour. They explored Telluride together, not as tourist and resident, but as equal observers noticing different aspects of shared experience. You see practical details I miss completely, Esther observed during one mountain hike. Engineering that prevents erosion, construction techniques that weather harsh conditions. You perceive beauty I would have overlooked without your guidance, Nicholas countered. Color variations in ordinary rock, light transformations across common landscapes. Neither mentioned the night of his return. Neither initiated physical contact beyond accidental brushes of hands or shoulders. They were building something new atop the ruins of what came before, cautious architects afraid of repeating structural flaws that had collapsed their previous construction. On rare occasions when his phone rang with business matters, Nicholas would excuse himself briefly, handle essentials with remarkable efficiency, then return to their shared activity without allowing electronic intrusion to fracture attention. Esther noted these moments with cautious appreciation, evidence of structural change rather than temporary behavioral adjustment. A month passed before she invited him to her home again, not for passion, but for honesty. "I need to show you something," she explained, leading him to her studio after simple dinner shared at her kitchen table. The paintings, covering every available surface, told their story, from their first meeting during the storm to their bitter separation. 5 years of emotion captured in color and texture, her initial rage after their divorce, violent reds slashing across black backgrounds, her eventual grief, muted grays and hollow shapes suggesting absence rather than presence. Her gradual healing, tentative colors emerging through darkness like spring following harsh winter. And most recently, her confusion at his return. Canvases where light and darkness battled without clear resolution, hope and caution engaged in endless negotiation. "You never left me," Nicholas realized, touching the edge of one particularly painful canvas, dark slashes cutting across what might have been two entwined figures. "Not in your art. You were the most significant emotional event of my life," Esther admitted, vulnerability replacing careful guardedness. "Both the joy and the pain. How could I not paint that?" Moving to the most recent works, created since his return, Nicholas recognized the central question dominating her artistic exploration. Whether damage could transform into something stronger through honest confrontation. Whether separate paths could reconverge with greater wisdom after painful divergence. "These recent pieces," he observed quietly, "they're asking rather than declaring." "Because I'm asking rather than declaring," Esther confirmed, standing beside him before the unfinished canvas on her easel. "Whether genuine change can overcome fundamental nature, whether we've both transformed enough to integrate rather than merely compromise." The question hung between them, impossible to answer intellectually, requiring demonstrated truth rather than verbal assurance. 5 years earlier, Nicholas would have presented compelling evidence, persuasive arguments, strategic reasoning. Now he simply acknowledged the legitimacy of her uncertainty. "The answer lives in daily choice rather than dramatic declaration," he observed, "in consistent presence rather than passionate promises." Esther studied him with the penetrating gaze that had initially seen beyond his corporate facade to essential humanity. "When did you become philosopher instead of strategist?" "When strategy failed to achieve what matters most," he replied without hesitation. That night, when his lips found hers beside her front door, the kiss contained no desperation, only tender recognition of paths realigning through conscious choice rather than automatic passion. "Stay," she whispered against his mouth. "Not for physical intimacy. Just be here when I wake up." They slept entwined, fully clothed atop her covers. For the first time in 5 years, both rested without ghosts between them. Not because painful history had been erased, but because they'd finally acknowledged its essential role in their transformation. Morning arrived with gentle certainty, sunlight filtering through simple curtains to illuminate two people who had survived significant destruction, both of relationship and of individual certainty. Esther woke first, studying Nicholas's sleeping face, vulnerability replacing the controlled expression he maintained during consciousness. When his eyes opened, finding her watching him, neither spoke immediately. The silence contained neither awkwardness nor strategy, simply shared recognition of significant threshold crossed without dramatic declaration. "Coffee?" she finally offered, the simple domestic question somehow more profound than elaborate professions. "Yes," Nicholas replied, equal simplicity matching her deliberate understatement. "That would be nice." As they moved through morning routine, sharing bathroom space, preparing breakfast, discussing plans for the day, something fundamental shifted in their tentative reconnection. Not dramatic reconciliation or passionate reunion, but something potentially more significant, sustainable integration. That afternoon, walking together through Telluride's autumn-painted streets, an acquaintance called greeting to Esther. The woman's curious gaze moved to Nicholas, obvious question contained in her expression. "This is Nicholas," Esther said simply, neither adding qualifying descriptors nor elaborate explanation. "We're rediscovering each other." The phrase, accurate without defining, honest without overpromising, perfectly captured their current navigation. They were neither strangers nor established partners, neither beginning nor concluding. They existed in the complex middle territory where genuine relationship develops after initial passion fades, where deliberate choice replaces automatic attraction. That evening, standing on her porch beneath emerging stars, Nicholas traced constellations with extended finger, patterns they'd discussed during their first night together years earlier. Cassiopeia, he identified, outlining the distinctive W formation. The queen who boasted of beauty greater than the sea nymphs, causing divine punishment. Yet immortalized in stars despite her transgression, Esther noted, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Punishment that transformed into eternal recognition. The metaphor hung between them, unspoken but mutually acknowledged. Sometimes painful consequences contained unexpected grace. Sometimes separation created possibility for more authentic reunion. Nicholas's hand found hers, fingers interlacing without dramatic gesture, connection re-established through quiet certainty rather than desperate grasping. "One step at a time," Esther murmured, neither pulling away nor pressing closer. "No promises beyond this moment." "This moment contains everything necessary," Nicholas replied, the simple truth reflecting transformation deeper than strategic calculation ever achieved. Above them, stars continued ancient patterns, constant yet ever-changing in human perception, just as they remained fundamentally themselves while simultaneously becoming something new through conscious evolution. Chapter 9. Delicate Reconstruction. "I can't move back to New York," Esther stated plainly over breakfast, their first morning awakening together with intention rather than impulse. 2 months of careful reconnection had gradually evolved into physical intimacy, yet fundamental questions remained unaddressed. Nicholas nodded, sipping coffee from the chipped mug she'd given him years ago. She'd kept it, he realized, a small artifact from their shared history. "I wouldn't ask that of you," he replied. "This is your home, your community. But your business can function without my physical presence," he interrupted gently. "Technology exists for a reason, Esther, and honestly, I've grown tired of skyscrapers blocking stars." The simplicity of his acceptance, so different from the man who had once needed to control every aspect of his environment, startled her. People didn't change fundamentally, she'd always believed, yet evidence suggested otherwise. "What about the penthouse?" she asked, testing the depth of his transformation. "Listed for sale last month," Nicholas replied, surprising her with the finality of the decision. "The realtor called yesterday with an offer." "You're really leaving it all behind?" Disbelief colored her tone, despite mounting evidence of his commitment. Nicholas reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. "I'm not leaving anything behind, Esther. I'm moving towards something infinitely more valuable." They established new patterns cautiously. 3 dinners weekly at her house, Sunday hikes regardless of weather, museum exhibitions when they opened in town. Nicholas converted his rented house's spare bedroom into a remote office, scheduling video conferences around their time together rather than vice versa. Physical intimacy returned gradually, tentative at first, then with increasing confidence as bodies relearned familiar landscapes transformed by time and experience, more communicative than in their youth, more patient, more attuned to nuance. "We're better at this now," Esther observed one night, her head resting on his chest as moonlight painted silver patterns across tangled sheets. Experience has advantages, Nicholas agreed, fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. We're not discovering each other so much as rediscovering with greater wisdom. And appreciation, she added softly, for what we almost lost permanently. Occasionally his corporate life intruded, urgent calls requiring immediate attention, market fluctuations demanding temporary focus. Unlike before, Nicholas maintained transparent communication about these necessities. The Singapore situation needs 30 minutes, he would explain, setting clear boundaries around interruptions. Then I'm completely present for our evening. You've actually done it, Esther observed one evening, watching him decline an emergency meeting that would have once been automatic priority. Recalibrated your priorities completely. Not completely, Nicholas corrected. Just appropriately. The company matters, but not at the expense of what gives life meaning. Their relationship now existed in public view, small-town curiosity making privacy impossible. Whispers followed them through Telluride streets. The wealthy businessman who'd abandoned empire for love, the talented artist who'd given him second chance. Their story, with details exaggerated and motivations simplified, held irresistible narrative appeal. Did you really sell everything to win her back? The barista at their favorite coffee shop finally asked Nicholas directly, curiosity overcoming discretion. I didn't sell anything to win anyone back, he replied with surprising patience. I simplified complications that prevented genuine living. They've turned us into a fairy tale, Esther remarked afterward, amused by the exchange. People need stories of redemption, Nicholas replied, unfazed by public scrutiny that would have once demanded strategic management. Let them find hope in their version of us. 6 months into their renewed relationship, Esther received an offer from a prominent Denver gallery, a featured exhibition requiring temporary relocation to the city. Anxiety shadowed her excitement as she shared the news. It's 8 weeks minimum, she explained, studying Nicholas's face for reaction. Possibly longer if sales warrant extended showing. That's wonderful, he responded with genuine enthusiasm that surprised her. Your work deserves broader audience. You don't mind the separation? Uncertainty edged her question. Nicholas smiled with understanding rather than offense. I have video conferencing for business. It works equally well for relationships. His expression grew more serious. I trust what we've built, Esther. It can withstand geographical distance because we've eliminated emotional separation. The Denver opportunity became an unexpected test of their reconstructed foundation. Nicholas visited weekends. Esther returned midweek when possible. Digital connection maintained daily communication, yet neither felt the desperate anxiety that had characterized their previous attempts at balancing separate demands. We've found equilibrium, Esther realized during their final weekend before her return. Not through compromise, but through mutual support of individual purpose. On the anniversary of his reappearance in her life, Nicholas didn't propose remarriage. They'd agreed formal legalities would remain in their past, at least for now. Instead, he offered a different kind of commitment. I've purchased land, he explained, unfolding architectural plans across her kitchen table. Just outside town, I was thinking we could design something together. Not to replace your house, he added quickly. A weekend place, perhaps, or a larger studio for your work. The blueprints revealed his thoughtfulness. Separate spaces that could function independently, yet connect seamlessly. Room for both their needs without sacrificing individuality. A metaphor in architecture, Esther observed, smiling softly. Form following function, Nicholas agreed. Our function being interdependent autonomy rather than merged identity. That night, she painted him for the first time since their divorce, not from memory, but from life. Nicholas sat patiently as her brush captured the man he'd become, still powerful but gentler around the edges, still ambitious but with redirected purpose. When she finished, they both recognized the portrait showed not just Nicholas, but Esther's forgiveness made visible through color and light. "You've always seen me more clearly than I've seen myself," he observed, studying the finished canvas with wonder. "Artists perceive essence beneath surface," Esther replied, cleaning brushes with practiced efficiency. "Though, I'll admit, my vision wasn't always this clear." The land they'd purchased together became weekend project, visiting architects, discussing design concepts, envisioning shared future without surrendering individual identity. Unlike their former attempts at integration, this construction acknowledged fundamental differences while creating deliberate connection points. "Eastern-facing windows in your studio for morning light," Nicholas suggested during one planning session. "Western exposure for my office to catch afternoon sun." "Separate entrances," Esther added, "but connecting hallway for deliberate rather than automatic integration." The metaphorical significance wasn't lost on either of them, consciously designing relationship architecture that prevented previous structural failures. Not through compromise that left both partially unsatisfied, but through thoughtful accommodation of authentic needs. As construction began, foundation poured during early autumn in preparation for spring building, Esther found herself studying Nicholas with renewed appreciation, not just for his obvious devotion, but for his willingness to evolve without abandoning core identity. "You haven't actually changed who you are," she observed one evening as they reviewed construction progress photographs. "You've just prioritized aspects of yourself previously subordinated to achievement." "The man I am now was always present," Nicholas acknowledged, "just buried beneath accumulation rather than essence." That night, beneath blankets on her porch swing, they watched shooting stars stream across Telluride's impossibly clear sky. Unlike their first night together years earlier, no thunder disrupted cosmic display, no storm threatened sudden intrusion. "We needed that first storm," Esther mused, tucked against his side for warmth against mountain chill, to break established patterns and create possibility for connection. "And we needed the separation," Nicholas added, honest assessment replacing regret, "to discover what actually matters beyond initial attraction." Her fingers found his in darkness, interlacing with comfortable familiarity. "The foundation we're building now is stronger for having experienced both construction and demolition. Above them, stars maintained ancient patterns while simultaneously hurtling through space at incomprehensible speeds, both constant and changing simultaneously. Like the two people observing them from a mountain porch, learning that genuine connection requires both stability and evolution, both certainty and adaptation. Chapter 10. Public Whispers. Their rekindled relationship couldn't remain private forever in a town Telluride's size. Whispers began, curious, occasionally judgmental. "Isn't that her ex-husband? Heard he left his company for her. Think they'll remarry. Wonder how long before he breaks her heart again." Esther's art students asked increasingly personal questions. Nicholas's business associates, when visiting, observed the obvious connection with poorly concealed interest. Their story, the wealthy businessman who sacrificed empire for love, held irresistible narrative appeal. "We've become local mythology," Esther remarked after overhearing particularly romantic speculation in the town's grocery store. Star-crossed lovers reunited against impossible odds. Nicholas squeezed her hand gently. "People need to believe in second chances. Let them find hope in their version of us." The first true test came when a prominent gallery in Denver offered Esther a major exhibition. Opening night would require Nicholas to face social scrutiny as her partner, no longer her husband, not yet defined by any conventional term. We could say you're my patron, Esther joked, sorting through potential pieces for the show. I prefer devoted admirer, Nicholas countered, examining a particularly striking canvas. Though hopelessly in love works too. The exhibition opening coincided with an unexpected development, a profile of Nicholas in Business Monthly highlighting entrepreneurs who downsized successfully. The journalist, sensing a human interest angle, requested an interview with both Nicholas and the woman who inspired his radical life change. Absolutely not, was Esther's immediate response. Our relationship isn't fodder for public consumption. Nicholas agreed, declining the journalist's request. But damage had already occurred. Someone, perhaps a former business associate with loose lips, had shared details of their complicated history. The night of Esther's exhibition, they arrived separately by mutual agreement. She needed space to interact professionally without relationship dynamics intruding. Nicholas understood, keeping respectful distance while still offering support with his presence. Near midnight, as the last patrons departed, Esther found him studying her centerpiece, an abstract rendering of two paths diverging, then reconnecting with greater strength. "They're calling you my muse," she said, sliding her hand into his. "The mysterious tycoon who abandoned Wall Street for Colorado's mountains." "Let them talk," Nicholas replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "Their narratives don't define us." As they left together, a photographer's flash caught them unaware, the image appearing in Denver's arts section the following week. "Financial magnate supports former wife's artistic triumph," read the caption, reducing their complex journey to tabloid simplicity. Rather than retreat from scrutiny, they chose selective engagement. Nicholas accepted speaking engagements addressing work-life balance. Esther agreed to mentor young artists struggling with commercial pressures. Together, they established a small foundation supporting arts education in mountain communities. Their public emergence culminated at a benefit Nicholas organized for regional mental health services. Entering together, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his arm, they faced society's curious gaze as a united front. When an attendee tactlessly asked about their unconventional relationship status, Esther smiled without embarrassment. "We're writing our own rules this time," she replied simply. "The last chapter isn't finished yet." Chapter 11. Unexpected Symmetry. Winter blanketed Telluride in pristine white, transforming the landscape into something ethereal. Snowflakes descended in perfect crystalline formations, each unique yet harmonious in collective beauty. Construction on their shared property had paused with the first heavy snowfall, foundations laid, but walls yet unraised, a metaphor neither missed for their rebuilt relationship. Esther's 50th birthday approached, a milestone she viewed with philosophical acceptance rather than dread. The years had brought wisdom rather than mere age, experience rather than just time passed. Nicholas planned a small gathering of her closest friends, respecting her aversion to grand gestures while still honoring the significance of her life's half-century mark. They walked together along snow-hushed streets, their breath forming delicate clouds that dissipated into the crystalline air. Esther's gloved hand rested comfortably in his, the contact no longer tentative but assured. "50 feels different than I expected," she confessed. "Less like an ending, more like mid-chapter in a story that keeps revealing unexpected turns." "The best narratives resist predictable progression," Nicholas replied, snow crunching beneath their boots as they navigated familiar paths, made new by winter's transformation. 3 days before the planned celebration, her phone rang with an unfamiliar New York number. Esther almost ignored it, telemarketers being the usual suspects of unknown contacts, but something prompted her to answer. "Ms. Moon?" a professional voice inquired. "This is Margaret Weston from the Whitney Museum. We're curating an exhibition on emotional landscapes in contemporary American art. Your name has been recommended repeatedly." The conversation that followed altered everything. The Whitney wanted not just existing works, but a commissioned series, her interpretation of emotional evolution through life seasons. 6 months to create, with substantial financial backing and international exposure. When Nicholas returned from his morning hike, cheeks flushed with cold and exertion, he found Esther staring out the window, expression unreadable as she watched snowflakes spiral toward Earth. "The Whitney called," she said without preamble. "They want me in New York for 6 months, starting next month." The irony struck them simultaneously, their situations perfectly reversed from years earlier. Now Esther faced career opportunity requiring relocation. Now Nicholas would be the one left behind. "You have to accept," he said immediately, crossing the room to embrace her. The certainty in his voice contained no hesitation, no calculation of personal cost. "This is the recognition you've always deserved." "It would mean leaving you," Esther pointed out, searching his face for hidden reservation. "Living in the city where we once failed so spectacularly." "The circumstances are entirely different," Nicholas countered. "I have video conferencing. Airplanes exist. We've learned how to communicate properly." He kissed her forehead gently. "Besides, I still maintain the penthouse. It's yours for however long you need it." "I thought you sold it," she said, surprise evident. "The offer fell through last month," he explained. "I took it as the universe's peculiar foresight." That night, lying awake beside his sleeping form, Esther confronted her fear. Not of the professional challenge, her artistic confidence had solidified with age, not even of temporary separation. They'd proven their connection could withstand distance. No, she feared symmetry itself. The universe's apparent determination to test them from both sides of the same equation. Would she fare better than Nicholas had when roles were reversed? Would her art consume her as completely as business had once consumed him? The morning of her birthday, Nicholas presented her with an unexpected gift, a small wooden box containing a single key. "To the penthouse," he explained, "completely renovated based on your original design suggestions. The north bedroom has been converted to a studio with perfect natural light." Tears blurred Esther's vision. "You knew I'd accept before I did." "I knew you couldn't refuse your art," Nicholas corrected gently, "just as you once knew I couldn't abandon my company. The difference is we're not making the same mistakes twice." The Whitney contract arrived the following day. 6 months in New York. Opening reception, coinciding with the museum's centennial celebrations. Esther signed without hesitation, Nicholas's steady hand resting supportively on her shoulder. As departure approached, they established parameters learned from painful experience. Weekly video calls, non-negotiable, monthly visits, alternating locations, complete transparency regarding schedule changes and emotional states. The night before her flight, they walked to the unfinished structure that would eventually become their shared space. Snow crunched beneath their boots, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. The skeleton of their future home stood outlined against the night, promise taking physical form through deliberate construction. "We're testing our theory," Esther mused, breath fogging in the cold air. "That love requires space to breathe while still remaining connected." "We've had worse tests," Nicholas replied, drawing her close against the mountain chill. "And failed spectacularly. But failure taught us how to succeed." Their goodbye at the small regional airport contained no dramatic promises or tearful pleas, just quiet confidence in what they'd rebuilt together, a love mature enough to bend without breaking. "New York will feel strange without you," Esther admitted, as final boarding was announced. "It will be waiting for you when you return, Nicholas assured her, meaning far more than the city itself. As her plane ascended through crystal-clear mountain sky, Esther watched Telluride recede beneath her, not with anxiety but with certainty that distance would test but not threaten what they had so carefully reconstructed. Some foundations, once properly laid, could withstand any storm. Chapter 12. Full Circle Harmony. New York embraced Esther differently this time, not as an artist's wife, but as an artist in her own right. The Whitney residency consumed her days with creative intensity. Colors flowed from her brushes with newfound freedom, each canvas capturing emotional transitions more powerfully than words could express. The city that had once felt suffocating now energized her. Perhaps because she walked its streets on her own terms, or perhaps because every video call with Nicholas reinforced that distance tested but could not sever what they had so carefully rebuilt. True to their agreement, Nicholas visited monthly. Each reunion revealed subtle evolutions. Esther growing more confident in artistic circles, Nicholas more comfortable in the city that had once defined him. They explored Manhattan together with fresh perspectives, discovering hidden gardens tucked between skyscrapers and small galleries showcasing emerging talents. "You see the city differently now," Esther observed during one sunset walk along the High Line, spring blossoms emerging amidst urban steel. "Less as conquest, more as creation." "I see everything differently now," Nicholas replied, his hand finding hers, "through eyes that value beauty above acquisition." As summer painted the city in golden light, Esther completed her final commissioned piece, a massive triptych depicting emotional reconnection after profound loss. Critics praised its raw honesty, its sophisticated layering of pain and healing. The Whitney exhibition opening drew unprecedented crowds, art world luminaries mingling with curious public. "Your recent work suggests profound reconciliation," a prominent critic observed during an interview. "Is this autobiographical?" Esther's gaze found Nicholas across the crowded gallery, his tall figure distinctive even among Manhattan's elite. Their eyes locked in silent communication that transcended physical distance. "Art always contains fragments of the artist's truth," she replied diplomatically. "But I prefer letting viewers find their own meaning in the spaces between color and form." Later that night, as they walked hand in hand through the emptied exhibition space, Nicholas stopped before the triptych centerpiece. "You captured us perfectly," he murmured. "The storm, the separation, the return." "Our story deserved honoring," Esther replied simply, "both the pain and the redemption." The exhibition's success brought unexpected opportunities. The Whitney offered Esther a permanent curatorial position, building bridges between rural artists and urban markets. Simultaneously, Nicholas received an offer to serve on the board of a sustainable investment fund headquartered in Manhattan, a role that aligned perfectly with his evolved business philosophy. "We could maintain both homes," he suggested during a late-night conversation, "neither of us permanently tethered to one location." "A bicoastal existence," Esther mused. "Telluride when the mountains call, New York when civilization beckons." 6 months later, construction completed on their mountain property, an architectural marvel blending modern lines with natural materials. Glass walls framed spectacular views, while stone foundations anchored the structure firmly to Colorado soil. Their shared space manifested the balance they'd achieved personally. Connected yet independent, integrated yet autonomous. In New York, they transformed the penthouse together, replacing sterile minimalism with warm textiles and original artwork from unknown artists they championed. The space evolved from symbol of status to haven of creativity. On the 5th anniversary of their reunion, they stood together on their Telluride property's expansive deck, watching storm clouds gather over distant peaks, not unlike the night that first brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Esther asked suddenly. The years we lost. Nicholas considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I regret my choices that caused them, but without that separation, without learning what truly matters, he gestured to the life they'd built together. We might never have appreciated this properly. Lightning flashed across the valley, illuminating the landscape in brief, brilliant clarity, much like the understanding that had finally united them permanently. Full circle, Esther murmured, leaning into his embrace as thunder echoed through the canyon. No, Nicholas corrected gently. A spiral. We've returned to where we began, but at a higher elevation, wiser, stronger, better equipped for the journey ahead. As rain began falling, gentle at first, then with increasing intensity, they remained on the deck, unwilling to retreat from nature's display. Unlike their first storm together, this one held no fear, only appreciation for forces powerful enough to alter life's direction when necessary. Later that night, as Esther curled against him beneath hand-woven blankets, Nicholas whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for opening your door that night. Both times." "Thank you for having the courage to knock," she replied sleepily. "Both times." Their love, once fractured by ambition and misaligned priorities, had reconstructed itself into something more resilient, a masterpiece crafted from broken pieces, more beautiful for having been rebuilt with intention and care. And as they drifted to sleep, while rain drummed steadily against cedar shingles, both understood that some journeys require detours to reach the proper destination. The storm that had once forced them together had returned, not as disruption, but as celebration. Nature's symphony honoring two souls who had finally learned to dance in perfect harmony with both the world and each other. Outside their window, a small hummingbird sought shelter beneath the eaves, its tiny form defying the elements with remarkable resilience. Like the two humans sleeping peacefully within, it had found its perfect sanctuary amid life's inevitable storms. The end.